Good afternoon, all. It is a great privilege and honor for me to extend a hearty welcome to all of you for this fifth day of SCTP afternoon session. Let me introduce myself. I am Adeline Frida, Assistant Professor, Department of Information Technology. Today we have a knowledge enabling session, blockchain and cybersecurity, various dimensions. We have an eminent speaker for this session, Mr. Pratap. Mr. Pratap is an IIT Bombay graduate and done his postgraduate from IIC Bangalore. He has 25 plus years of IT experience. He was the first globally to describe how blockchains can be applied, transform the global insurance industry. Mr. Pratap has also written 2 research papers on reducing modern slavery using artificial intelligence and blockchain, and is working to bring this to life. He's an expert in catastrophe modeling related IT systems. On behalf of the management of KCG College and Department of Information Technology, I welcome our speaker for the session, Mr. Pratap. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, sir. You can continue, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. It's visible, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Still visible. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. So my name is Pratap Tambe. I am the head of BFSI blockchain consulting for TCS in UK and Europe. I've been working in blockchains since August 2015. Primarily, I've been working in permissioned ones, though I am aware of the public ones as well. Well, I've done less work in public permissionless ones. Most importantly, these are my personal views and not those of Tata Consultancy Services. So we are going to talk about blockchain and cybersecurity, various dimensions. And I will be talking about the current context of cyber risk. And then we'll talk about what are the dimensions of cyber risk. Then we'll talk about, so that will be the first topic. After that, we will cover cyber security, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability in blockchains. And finally, we will see how to best utilize blockchains in reducing cyber risk. Yeah. So let's talk about current context of cyber risk and the dimensions of cyber risk. Firstly, regarding the current context of cyber risk, I don't know if you are aware, very recently, the Central Bank of New Zealand was hacked. I have been expecting these kind of things for some time, and rest assured that that will not be the last central bank that is hacked. There will be more. And then all of you are familiar with the sad story of Nidhi Razdan, So that again is not the last in the series. There will be much more and much more bad kind of incidents. And we are here to talk about how can blockchain and why blockchain is important in basically reducing these. So, the probability of cyber risk incidents is rising, and they are becoming more intense as well. As humanity leverages more and more digital technology, there will be a lot more losses due to cyber as peril. Now, what this is a technical term, basically, which means that the cause of the loss is cyber, and as digital technology increases, there will be more and more risk for everybody. Why is this increasing? Because we are, our data and operations, whatever are supporting our social lives and work lives, those data and the operations are increasingly digital, and it is possible for third parties, who basically want to steal our data or who want to disturb our operations and basically demand ransoms and so on, or cause loss of different kinds to us. That capability has increased, and this risk is going to increase. I don't know if you are familiar with Moore's law, which basically says that the computing capability goes up every 18 months, doubles every 18 months. So that law continues to be applicable. Then we have the advanced persistent threat, which basically means that governments are trying to hack each other, and some governments are more active at hacking each others and others are less. Then we have quantum computing. Quantum computing is has developed quite well, and publicly we believe, there is public information about who has how much computing capability, and there is a competition, arms race going on. But that is what we know publicly. But privately, I mean, basically, do we really know what exactly the situation is? Who is able to do what? And this is not true only about cyber, but it is especially important about cyber. We don't even know who is capable of doing what. There are so many things that I can think of which could cause damage to individuals and corporates, we using the digital technology. And I'm sure there are smart brains on the other side, on the dark side, who are spending their time. And most importantly, as customers, partners, suppliers leverage digital technology, cyber risk will rise. So the whole idea is that everybody wants to use digital technology. It's the buzzword and all. But whenever anybody says digital, I hear cyber risk, and this risk is going to increase. And most importantly, this financial impact of the cyber risk incidents are rising due to GDPR, NIS, and other regulations. And some of them are applicable only in Europe, but there are equivalents emerging in all jurisdictions. So then there are basically definition of the definition of cyber risk incident is changing. The notification requirements related to cyber risk incidents are changing. The penalties for data breaches are changing, and there is a focus on privacy by design, which means that you should not have data which you don't need. And many people are still not adapting to this thing because of reasons we shall discuss. So all of this is the situation. So basically, the risk is rising, and the financial losses due to them are rising. And then you have various cyber as peril scenarios, which are applicable to individuals. They are applicable to customers. They're applicable to partners. So basically your organization has itself some losses, and you may be causing losses to your customers. You may be causing losses to your partners. You may be causing losses to your partners, because of which they will basically make claims on you. So those all of those scenarios are there, and you have to basically protect against them. And then there are costs related to this. You have to bear costs for forensic investigation. There may be extortion. There may be legal fees. There'll be notification expenses. There'll be public relations cost. There'll be business interruption expenses. There'll be financial liabilities. There will be publishing liabilities, because you have to publish basically who was, you have to publish something or the other about what was, what has happened. And then there are restoration and replacement expenses. And I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, there was an incident where, because of cyber risk, a dam was burst, or a dam was stopped, its operation changed, and that caused a huge amount of damage. There are cyber risk to nuclear risk reactors. All of this just says that this thing is just bursting to happen. So what are the dimensions of cyber risk? I worked in insurance. So there are two primary dimensions. One is the basically quantum of data at risk. So what is the quantum of data that is at risk? And now, depending on which country that data is stored, the regulations change, and so therefore that is an important attribute of the data at risk. Then there is size and size and type of the data. Personal data is toxic waste. It's like nuclear waste. Nobody should have it, but people still do. How much of personal data do you store? That's a big variable. And how much data do you store? How many copies of the data you store, and so on. And people are just not, need to modify their practice to minimize this data according to the current regulations, but people still haven't. And then what are the assets that are impacted by your data? Like the example I gave you of the dam or the nuclear reactor. If cyber people were to hack basically the power plants and stop power to countries, they can do lots of damage. So what are the assets that are impacted by your data? What are your storage and transfer mechanisms? Do you basically use encryption? What encryption you use? How many times you transfer the data? How many copies you store? All of that, or those mechanisms. How do you store the data? What kind of storage you use? All of that is relevant to this quantum of data at risk. What data is stored in what mechanism? Then basically the quantum of risk to data measures. This is whatever data you have, what is the risk to that? So what is your disaster recovery mechanism? What is your business recovery mechanism? What is your network intrusion recovery mechanism? What is your security policy, vendor security policy, privacy policy, IT maturity, encryption quality, antivirus quality, firewall quality? These are all dimensions of your risk to data measures. So this is the methods by which insurers measure essentially the risk. But what I'm going to talk to you now is not about insurance, about how blockchain can help you manage this risk. The objective of these two slides was to define the problem and context for you. And now let's talk about how blockchains help. So let's first talk about what are the blockchain aspects of cyber security aspects of blockchains themselves. Yeah. Uh, so firstly, cyber security means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now let's talk about what happens in blockchains. Firstly, let's talk about confidentiality. How does blockchain ensure confidentiality? So firstly, blockchains, there are public blockchains and private blockchains. In public blockchains, data is anybody can enter, and people can have own copy. Anybody can have a copy of the entire database. So we are not talking about that. We are focusing on permissioned ones. So we can have basically this network access. You can control network access. Blockchains can support different types of identity systems can be used with blockchains. And you can vary those. So it is possible to use various different types of identity systems, and the new ones emerging basically are self-sovereign identity systems. Then only relevant party nodes can participate in consensus. In some blockchains, all nodes can participate. In some blockchains, only relevant party nodes can participate. So this ensures some level of control over who can participate in blockchain transactions. That's the key thing. And then data access and disclosure. So in some blockchains, only some nodes or only relevant, all nodes can store the copy of the data. In other blockchains, only the relevant parties to a transaction uh, can store the data, and other parties nodes do not contain that data. So if a transaction is relevant to you, then your node will contain the data. If the transaction is not relevant to you, then there's no storage of the data. This is basically what happens in blockchains like R3 Corda. The new other thing capability is this something called confidential computing. In different blockchains, it is called differently, but in this under this technology, people can get their data processed by others, by other nodes, by other platforms, without losing privacy and control over the data. So if five people had separate different data items, and they wanted to submit that data items to a third party and get that data processed by that third party, without that party essentially being able to get visibility of that data and getting control of that data, then but they wanted to get that compute some algorithm, then this is the mechanism by which you can do things. So this capability is now there in blockchain systems. And so this is one of the key things that supports confidentiality. The primary pro is that blockchains can prevent frauds through consensus mechanism and protect your data uh, due to the above capabilities. The primary con is that blockchains sometimes are more difficult to implement, and there is overhead because of a lot of some of this encryption and so on. So moving on, let's talk about integrity. So integrity is the next of the triad. So we are talking about immutability. Immutability in blockchains, you have to be very careful, because technically in very pure immutability is possible in only some blockchains, and that public blockchains primarily. In the private blockchains especially, it is even in the public blockchains, it is only theoretically possible. And they, like, for example, everybody believes that much of the new transactions are controlled by miners in China, and much of the new bitcoins go there. So there's an overemphasis of some countries or in public blockchains. And if people there, they can sanction essentially some other transactions from other countries and so on. And basically, it is possible, it is theoretically possible, if you use quantum computing and other types of technologies to essentially hack, create problems, and create a chain which is bigger than the previous chain, and you can hack things, and you can create some problems using quantum computing. So that's the immediate challenge in public ones. There is less challenge though in public ones. In private ones, it is some of these problems become very acute. The most important capability in private blockchains and permission blockchains is that blockchain can ensure that if somebody has tampered with the data, then you know that the data has been tampered because you have a copy and you can check it with the copy that they have, that everybody that is being that is being talked about. So basically that blockchain. So it's not pure immutability. So that is the benefit from an integrity point of view. Then we have the problem about right to be forgotten. So right to be forgotten, people believe that is not compatible with blockchains, but there are two techniques through which it can be made compatible. One is that uh, one is that you can encrypt the data, and when the right to forgotten is invoked, then you can throw away the keys. The second is that you store a hash on the blockchain, and you keep the data off the chain, so that when the right to forgotten is invoked, then you delete the off-chain data and the hash remains on the blockchain. So, but it points to things. But you have to make sure that in both these cases, you enter some transactions which authorize this within the blockchain, and those transactions, those data points, audit entries, are acceptable to the relevant stakeholders. So those are the two approaches that I've spoken about. Then we have traceability and non-repudiation. Traceability, the important thing about blockchains is that for every transaction you can trace back basically what was the previous transaction and previous transaction, and who are the stakeholders to that transaction, and so on. And so because you are able to do that, there is in public blockchains there's a proper chain of blocks. In private blockchains, you can create traceability, and you can ensure non-repudiation in both of them, because every transaction that is submitted has to be digitally signed with your private key. Now, this is a very there is a nuance to this. This non-repudiation works, only if the key with which you are signing has legal sanctity. So you have to be careful about this, unless there is some piece of paper which basically gives that gives you the right that it gives your commitment that you accept that responsibility for signing using that that is that responsibility. That non-repudiation does not work otherwise. Then we have basically the smart contracts. These smart contracts, sometimes people have hacked smart contracts and used it to basically tamper data and all. So there is a need for better coding, testing, deployment, and infrastructure management to prevent these risks to data integrity. Then data quality. Generally, we believe that data quality once the data, because it goes through a process of trusting. There are various people who validate the data before it is entered. So generally the belief is that blockchain ensures data quality. But that is true only if junk data is not entered. And where can junk data entered in blockchains? If you have trusted oracles. But trusted oracles basically can be a problem, because you are trusting you are putting your trust in something which is not on the blockchain, and for which blockchain based mechanism has not been used. Consensus mechanism has not been used to generate data. The best example I usually give for this is that suppose some land registry were to be automated, and there are various land parcels which are placed on that. If essentially those land parcels were determined by some individual, that individual can mess up. He makes a mistake, or he willfully basically damages that data or whatever, and enters that data, and based on that the blockchain system works. Then some properties may just not be there on the blockchain, or they may not be contiguous, or there may be issues. There may be overlaps between them, so those which could cause problems. So it is very necessary that you should have an oracle which is generated only through a consensus process. So even if you have a trusted oracle, you should basically pass that through a smaller group within the blockchain who has liabilities placed within the blockchain framework, legal liabilities placed within the blockchain framework, who basically processes the data and then generates an oracle. Only then it is more trustworthy. The pros of this, therefore, basically blockchain can detect tampering, which is basically due to the transparency, immutability, auditability, data encryption, etc. possibilities. The cons is that there are multiple copies, and there is an computational overhead, which because the humanity is becoming more and more rich in computing capability, so these should not be much of an issue going forward. So that's about the integrity portion. Now let's talk about availability. In blockchains, there are multiple nodes. Yeah. So there is no single point of failure. So therefore, they are naturally resilient to IP distributed denial of service attacks. But some, if but outages can happen. Basically, like we were talking about, the cyber security destroying power to a particular whole region, that can take out nodes in a whole region, and that can cause problems for blockchains, nodes which are in that region. So if the majority goes down, then the blockchain governance mechanisms and the consensus processes become weak. So it is very necessary to ensure that there is a minimum quorum. For this, you need to make sure that there are nodes in diverse places, and there are adequate number of nodes for the governance process to be robust and the consensus processes to be robust. The next thing is that blockchain has operational resilience, because there are peer-to-peer decision making, transactions happen through peer-to-peer processes. Then there are multiple nodes, there are distributed nodes, and they operate 24/7. But nevertheless, there can be some types of risk, that while a transaction is still waiting for validation, in some processes, if the consensus takes too long, or there are the transactions have not been well designed, there may be places where the transaction is still pending validity. That's where basically there could be people causing problems in those. Then there are situations where basically the smart contract that we spoke about, if they have not been well designed, then their security can impact, they can be used to bring down system the availability. And then regarding all of these, there are gray areas in the regulations. So that is another operational challenge, because if you, for example, that may impact the liabilities related to this and all. So the fundamental pro is that blockchains can increase availability due to no single point of failure. But the con primarily is that there are a lot more nodes, there is more overhead, so there is more cost and all. But that's the overall benefit is that the system is more resilient. So now we have covered essentially the cyber security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability triad for blockchains. Now this is the most important section. All this is nice and useful, nice, but this is the useful part. How does one use blockchain to improve cyber security? Let's talk about that. So let's talk about self-sovereign digital identities first. So how there are various types of identities. Centralized identity, and my favorite example of this there are various of them. This is not my favorite one. The favorite one is the next. So the centralized identity is a large honeypot of data. So where basically it's like saying, I have a huge data of people's personal data, come and hack me. That's an invitation that you put out there on the internet, that I have lots of data, come and hack me. And then basically, if you hack the data and you basically take down the data or destroy the data, then you can stop the operation. So that is also basically come and basically disrupt my operation. So this is what these centralized systems essentially do, that they invite people, come and hack me, come and disturb me operationally. That's what they do. I feel very emotional about these things, because I think this is absolutely silly idea, which has been continuing for far too long, and it needs to be stopped. The next thing is even worse, that even though there is a small honeypot, this is a digital identity which is shared between multiple nodes. The best example of this is honeypot. Is Aadhaar. Aadhaar is a federated digital identity. Many people use that identity. It is one data store, but basically that is used by lots of parties. And it is again, it is also an invitation to hack, and it's a single nick to choke people. It provides a mechanism for privileged parties to disadvantage non-privileged ones, and basically take away their abilities to perform transactions and experience simple conveniences of life. And so, it is abhorrent, in my personal opinion. This is very important. It's my personal opinion. And I think, therefore, that so all these federated identities, the best example of federated identities is your Facebook identity, which you use to log into places, or your Google identity, which you log into places, etc. And centralized identity is the user ID password that you use for a typical enterprise system. But even there may be single sign-on, and which is more like a federated digital identity. So these identities, all of them have honeypots of data. There are basically big banners saying, "Please come and attack me." But self-sovereign identity, digital identity, is a system, and I'll explain it a bit. There is no honeypot of data, and it is very difficult to choke this neck in this even in centralized systems. If centralized systems use self-sovereign digital identity for authentication, it is very difficult to choke the neck, and then it is even more difficult to choke the neck in blockchain systems. So that's that's the identity of advantage of self-sovereign digital identity. And there is no there is no need to store the personal data in those systems at all, because that data is stored on the device. And I will explain this in slightly more detail. In self-sovereign identity, in permission systems, like for example, Hyperledger Indy, the first ID can't be issued unless the ecosystem with trustees and stewards are in place. But in self-sovereign identity on permissionless systems, which use Bitcoin and Ethereum, the first ID can be issued before forming the ecosystem of parties. So, so that's the advantage of permissionless system. Generally, this is one of the use cases for which I prefer permissionless systems over permissioned ones. Now, I will briefly explain self-sovereign digital identity because some people may not be familiar with it. So what you see here is a user, John Doe, a bank, and basically this is a DI server, digital identity server. The digital identity server is connected to a public blockchain. And so basically John Doe creates a digital identity. John Doe creates a digital identity via a DID portal on the DI server, which is connected to public node on Ethereum. What that means is that he writes an immutable entry saying, that this is my public key, and this is my public key. He puts the public key. So the items which are put on the public blockchain are public key, web service address for authentication, web service address for sorry, web service address for attesting data. And then basically, the private key and credentials are stored on his user agent. The public key is put on the public node, while the private key is put on his user agent, which means basically on his phone or on a device that he prefers. And it is replicated to an encrypted copy of at the identity hub. So the first process that happens is that an individual creates a digital identity, places his public key on the public blockchain and the private key on his or her phone. Once that is done, John Doe creates a claim and provides a proof of identity, driving license, and a proof of address, maybe passport, digital copies of these to the bank to attest the claim. Since the bank will have physical copies of these, because he is a member of that bank, he has to usually log into the bank before he requests this. So he logs into the bank. Because he has logged in, the bank knows that it is this person who is my customer, and therefore the bank is able to identify who that person is because they have done the KYC for him. The bank basically checks these two digital documents that have been provided and validates that against their copies of those documents which were provided during the KYC process. And based on that, they attest the claim, which is digitally. So that attestation of the claims, the bank's attestation of the claim goes, goes to John Doe, and John Doe can accept it and store it into his phone. So now, essentially, he has he has verifiable credentials. So he has credentials which are stored on his phone and which are part of a persona. A persona is a group of credentials. And now he can go to a wealth manager, for example, to open a new account, and he presents his digital identity. The wealth manager uses his digital identity to get the public key from the blockchain, and create a DID authentication request. And basically you go to what he does is he logs into a website of the wealth manager, and he basically says, I want to open an account, here is my DID. So using that DID, the wealth manager goes and goes to the public blockchain, gets a request, sends him an authentication request, and based on that authentication request, that the John Doe receives a request to confirm his identity, and using his phone, he can confirm the identity because he has the private key. This is very critical. Only if because he has a private key, he is able to confirm the identity, and he responds. And if once the identity is confirmed, then the wealth manager can check the credential. And this is also a very important step, if and only if the bank is able to verify that the credential was provided by Deutsche Bank, and they trust Deutsche Bank to provide such credentials, and they know that they are able to validate that it is indeed Deutsche Bank which has provided Deutsche Bank, which is the bank which has provided the credential, then basically they can then basically that they can go ahead with and open that account for them. Yeah. So that's the that's basically the journey for self-sovereign digital identity. Now let's discuss can you use SSI to reduce cyber risk for corporates. Cyber risk is maximum for personal data. Despite GDPR, many corporates are still holding personal data despite not needing to. The prime reason is that there is a current paradigm of correlating data from multiple websites to target people better for their products. SSI breaks this paradigm because customer can have multiple personas in one SSI. So people are not yet comfortable with this new paradigm. But this is the most important thing. If corporates want to reduce cyber risk that they face, they need to remove corporate personal data from their system because it's the most toxic kind of data. So then it is possible to personalize customer experience without storing personal data, just that the customer has more control due to the usage of SSI. Now, it is very important to understand this. It is not necessary, losing, if you use SSI, that does not mean that you cannot personalize the experience for individuals. In fact, you can do more personalization, and you can do personalization even for customers with whom you do not have a relationship. So that is why it is very important for people to adopt this thing and adopt the new paradigm. If transaction data is stolen and the attacker has, the other thing is that if there is no personal data, then even if the data is stolen, even if the transaction data is stolen, which is the only type of data it is stored really, because there's no personal data, then the attacker has no way of correlating that to identity, because due to that reduces the value of the data for that attacker. So this is the most important one of the most important slides in this whole deck. The other this is basically just elaborating on that idea. So you can have a blockchain ecosystem which can enable seamless transactions. So this is basically how the destination can look. So you can have a customer who creates a DID using specific DID server provider in partnership with identity provider, who may facilitate attestations to following attributes on the DID, maybe using third parties. This will be the photo, the address, the passport details, and various others depending on what all or the stakeholders want. And then basically the customer provides a DID for transactions with transaction providers of different kinds, which could be airlines, retailers, banks, hotels, etc., etc. And these partners use essentially the APIs to authenticate customers and personalize experience without needing to store PII. The most important thing is that the customer is in control and can optionally provide more data about their preferences, and can provide these to transaction providers with whom even to those people with whom they do not have a prior relationship. And most importantly, the providers do not need to store these preferences, because they can be provided each time. They can optionally store them associated with that DID, but it is not even necessary. They can be provided each time as well, because they, it just increases the speed and process of the customization. So this is how the whole thing can, that ecosystem can work. Blockchain ecosystem can work, but it is not necessary. But it is not necessary for for that this happen only with blockchains. As long as you are using SSI, you can use this with centralized systems as well. This is most important. It is not necessarily to use that you have to use blockchains only. You can do this with centralized systems as well. And even blockchain can be used to implement zero trust security, which can install trapdoors before each transaction providing platforms. And then, but it could be blockchains, and SSI can be made to fit with or augment their respective identity components. And there can be intra-organizational blockchains providing transaction services to customers, and such things are happening. Then you can have customer supplier provider blockchains providing transaction services to customers. Then you can have regulator driven blockchains providing transaction services to customers. You can have single industry wide blockchains providing transaction services to customers. Then you can have multi-industry wide blockchains providing transaction services to customers. Moving ahead, this is the last slide and probably the most important slide. As what is the relevance of SSI to reduce cyber risk to individuals? As deep fakes technology rises, I don't know if all are familiar with what deep fakes are. Deep fake technology is a technology by which you may see Barack Obama basically talking, but it might be John Doe, who is actually doing the talking, but you are thinking that it is Barack Obama doing the talking. So that is basically what deepfakes technology is. The need to leverage SSI for absolutely every digital interaction and transaction increases. There is no other alternative. There is no alternative. It is not whether, just when. Yeah. For example, are you sure that it is Pratap Tambe, the person mentioned on the first slide, who is making this presentation? Are you sure? Are you sure who you are speaking to when somebody calls saying that he or she is the CEO of your company and asks you to do something that you do not want to? Can we integrate SSI into email systems to reduce spam and phishing? Can we use SSI blockchain to ensure integrity of digital content and reduce malware on software deployments on personal and work devices? These are the things which are basically driving cyber risk. And using SSI kind of technologies ensures, and especially if there is legal validity to those, it is possible to assign liability properly, and it is possible to control, improve quality, and reduce cyber risk. So this is basically all I wanted to share with you today, and these are some of my details. I will be happy to take any questions now.
Participants, if you have any queries, you can ask.
Thank you to KCG for providing me this opportunity. I have wanted to talk on this topic for a long time, and I'm not sure who exactly referred me from Canada, but thank you for this opportunity. And thank you for Claudine and Anand and Anju for coordinating.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Participants, please stay. The feedback link will be posted in the chat box. You can fill the feedback link. It will be considered for your attendance also.
By the way, I did raise some doubt in your mind that whether it is Pratap Tambe making this presentation. I indeed confirm that it is, but you have no way of verifying it. That is my whole point. Right.
Sir?
Yeah. Okay. I'll send you a revised version. Please do not share this version of the presentation with anyone. I will send you a revised version. Okay. Hello, Anju.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.